What's up guys, welcome back to another video. Today we got a topic discussion for you guys and it's going to be about whether overhead athletes should be overhead lifting, as you can see by the title of the video. So before we get started, if you enjoy it, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I post new videos every Tuesdays and Thursdays, so make sure you're subscribed to catch all of them. Also, yes, I did put my pen in my ear to make me look smarter. Little trick. Okay, so now that I got comfortable, the topic of whether overhead athletes should be overhead lifting is, I don't want to say controversial because it's not controversial, but people have different opinions about it. Some people think it's not a big deal as long as obviously you're being responsible about it, and other people think you should completely steer clear of overhead lifting for overhead athletes. And by an overhead athlete, I mean somebody who performs their sport like in this motion overhead. So like a baseball player, tennis players, volleyball players, those types of things. So the problem with overhead lifting is, number one, when you're an overhead athlete, you're using that shoulder so much and it's taking so much load and stress. So when we're overhead lifting, we're kind of just adding on to that stress. And you don't want to like overuse that joint since it's highly susceptible to injuries and to overuse already. So in my opinion, when I'm training overhead athletes, I like to steer clear of your traditional overhead press, like with a barbell, for a couple of reasons. So like I said, people have different opinions on this. This is just my opinion. So I do think it's very important to do overhead pressing for all athletes. But when I say overhead pressing, I mean something with like a kettlebell or a dumbbell. My favorite would be the Landmine Bar. But I would not do a barbell overhead press with an overhead athlete because like I said, that overuse, and plus it loads your shoulder so much, and I just don't see the benefit of doing a strict overhead press with an overhead athlete when I could do something way more sport specific, way more transferable, like a landmine press, which actually brings your shoulder in a similar position. However, you go more in line with your with the direction your scap likes to travel in. So it's a lot better for your shoulder rather than forcing it up in this position. So my favorite alternative would be doing a landmine bar press or doing something with a dumbbell or a kettlebell. Now, jump back to a couple minutes ago when I said it's important to do some type of overhead pressing, and that's because when you overhead press, you really can work on your rhomboids, your lower and mid traps, and just your stability of your scaps, which is so important for overhead athletes because a lot of what you're doing, it's going to be power through your lats, but you need strength in your shoulder to help decelerate your arm. So you're using all those muscles back there to decelerate. Those external rotators are decelerating that motion, or else your arm's just gonna fly off your body. So it's really important to do overhead pressing to work on that aspect of it. So something that I would like to do would be doing an eccentric version of an overhead press. So if you want to use a barbell, for example, I would have it set up to where maybe you're seated, maybe you're standing, whatever you want to do, but have the rack up here. So you start, I know my hands are kind of cut out. So it's up here, so you're starting in this position, and all you're doing is lowering it super slowly with a tempo to work on those stabilizers and strengthening your decelerators in the back. And then you'd have a spotter help lift you up, you would reset, and you would go again. To me, that's a great way to work on an overhead pull, but still working those muscles back there. Now, you don't really need to overload your shoulders, which is what an overhead press would do, you know, putting it in this position, pressing up. You don't really need your shoulders to be strong in that sense. Obviously, you do need shoulder strength, but in that stabilization aspect, and you don't need to load it so heavy. So if I was doing an overhead press, that's the second thing I would make sure of, that it is super lightweight. And when I say super lightweight, I don't mean like 10 pounds, but keep it relatively low. I would say like 50% of your 1 rep max, because I would rather it be low weight and you use it as a power exercise. So for an overhead athlete, I would not use an overhead press as a strengthening exercise, but more for a power exercise. So if you're doing a split jerk, or if you're doing a push press, something of that nature where it's just quick and explosive rather than super high weight, just loading the crap out of your spine and your shoulders. And then the third thing falling in line with that is, if you are doing it, like I said, I would be cognizant of using a barbell, I would steer more towards a kettlebell or a dumbbell because it allows your shoulders to move more freely. When you're holding a barbell, you're just forcing it straight up in a plane that your shoulders don't really like to move in. They like to move in at a 45-degree angle in that scapular plane. So that's why I choose a dumbbell or a kettlebell, or like I said, my preferable method would be a landmine bar, because that is just absolutely amazing, getting that loading from the front, but also in that plane you like to go in. So I would always try to do a neutral grip when you're doing some type of overhead press. I know I see a lot of people at the gym grab it overhand like this, and it forces your shoulder up, and then it kind of like brings your hands in, putting that internal rotation in, and you have your wrist inside your shoulder, which is just not really good, and inside your elbow, which just puts a lot of stress on your shoulder. So if you do want to do an overhead press with a bar, then you can get one of the bars that has a neutral grip and just press it up. So that's what I would do for that instead. And then before any of this, I should have said this at the beginning, but I didn't. Make sure you have good range of motion in your shoulder. So if you are an overhead athlete and you don't have good range of motion, I mean, if you can't bring your arm back up here, if you can only bring your arm here, you should not be overhead lifting until you get strength, until you strengthen your shoulder and get mobility in, because it's not gonna help doing lifts above your head if you don't have that shoulder strengthened to handle the load, to decelerate. You're just gonna cause a lot of problems. So make sure you have good mobility and flexibility in your shoulder as well. And then for those of you who aren't overhead athletes, I'm less worried about it than for the overhead athletes. You don't really need to, like I said, worry about it the same, but still be careful, because if you load it really heavy, you still are susceptible to shoulder injuries. Obviously, it wouldn't be an overuse injury because you don't use it 100 times during practice or during a game. Let's say soccer, for example, like maybe you do like 2 or 3 throw-ins a game. I don't know, maybe you do more. If you do, then that's a bummer for you, because I suck at throw-ins. But you know, you don't have to really be worried about that overuse injury. But the same things apply that I said for the overhead athletes. Make sure that you have good range of motion and mobility before you go. Don't do heavy weights. Make sure your core is really, really tight. Overhead exercises are actually a great way to integrate core and to work on core stabilization. So that's why I think it's very important to do these no matter what, overhead or not overhead athletes. I think it's important because it works on core stabilizing in that extended state, which is crucial to athletics and to sports. So that's why it is important to do overhead lifts, especially even if you're not an overhead athlete, because it works that core in that stabilization manner. So before anybody gets started on an overhead lift, I would make sure that you have that good range of motion and you have a really strong core, because without those two things, you are just totally gonna get hurt, or you're gonna do something wrong, and over time you will hurt yourself. So at the end of the day, if you are an overhead athlete, I think it is fine to do overhead lifts if you have good range of motion and if you're keeping the loads light. However, I would always opt for a landmine bar press above a strict barbell press. And also with the landmine bars, you can load it really heavy, and it's a lot safer for your shoulder than doing an overhead barbell press. That's because, like I said, you're traveling in that scapular plane you like, and you're not putting it straight above your head, just forcing that impingement on the shoulder. And plus, doing a landmine bar, you can do double hand. You can also just do a single arm, which is gonna be amazing for core integration. So like I said earlier, you really wanna make sure you have a good, strong core when you're doing an overhead lift. And using a landmine bar, it's so sport specific because it puts you in the same position you're gonna be when you are in sports, playing your competition. So you get to integrate your core really well, working on that stability factor and kind of working on that lengthening between your hips and your shoulder to really get that good rotation so you can get that snap when you come back. So I would always stick for that. And then when you're doing that dumbbell or kettlebell, you know, you can do just standing. You could also do a half kneeling to integrate core as well. So at the end of the day, it is okay, but I would opt away from an overhead barbell press and try to do your other alternatives, because there's so many other alternatives that get the job done. Not even at the same level, but in my opinion, way better. Alrighty guys, well hopefully that helped you out if you are questioning whether you should do an overhead lift if you do play that overhead sport. Just be careful with what you're doing. Make sure that it doesn't hurt. Make sure your form is correct. We're not bending our low back. We have good shoulder range of motion. And my philosophy with life is if you have to question it, if you have to ask, should I be doing this? You probably shouldn't be doing that. And it goes to any single thing in life. If you're out there and you're like, should I vandalize this car in the parking lot? If you have to ask yourself, you probably shouldn't do it. Wisdom from Madison. So just be careful. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. I will get back to all of them. Head over to our website, www.powerluxfitness.com. Check out our articles. I post articles every week about different topics, so make sure you check it out, give it a read. Leave me a comment down below those articles if you have questions. Head over to our Instagram at powerlux_fitness and make sure you're subscribing to the channel so you don't miss anything in the future. Thank you guys for watching. I hope this was helpful and I will see you in the next one. Stay rad.